Today, we explore 3 questions about human cognition that directly influence how we lead and make decisions. First, what is the information processing limit of our brain? The answer may surprise you. Despite receiving billions of bits of sensory information per second, our brain can only process about 10 bits per second for decision making. Second, why do we have this information? We'll discover how this limitation is actually an essential adaptation for energy efficiency and effective decision making. And third, what are the consequences of this information bottleneck? Understanding those effects will help us design better organizational processes and avoid common cognitive traps. Our 5 primary sensory organs are the eyes, ears, skin, nose, and the tongue. Each organ plays a specialized role. The eyes detect light and color, the ears process sound and balance. The skin senses touch and temperature. The nose identifies smells, and the tongue perceives taste. Those sensory organs act like high-capacity data pipelines capable of processing millions to billions of bits per second from visual, auditory, and tactile inputs. The retina alone transmits about 1.6 gigabytes per second from its photoreceptors to our brains. Together, our sensory organs provide our brains with a continuous stream of sensory input from the external environment. Our brains then process sensory inputs and transmit information via neurons. Think of your brain's neurons like a vast network of message carriers. When a neuron fires, imagine it like a tiny electrical spark. It's similar to press send on an email. Each time this spark happens, your brain is transmitting a specific message, whether it's this coffee is hot or that light is bright. Those neural messages or spikes are the brain's way of coding and sharing information, much like how your phone converts your text messages into digital signals before sending them. By modeling this as bits, which is the smallest unit of information, researchers can measure how efficiently the brain transmits and processes data. It was found that only a fraction of this sensory data, approximately 10 bits per second, is filtered through our cognitive system and used for decision-making. This enormous reduction reflects the brain's strategy of focusing on high-priority signals while discarding redundancies and noise to optimize behavior and maintain cognitive efficiency. Our brains operate as a gatekeeper, which limits the information flow to a manageable trickle. To understand this information bottleneck of our brain, we need to grasp a fundamental concept from information theory called Shannon's entropy. You try to guess the next word in a sentence. In highly predictable contexts, such as common phrases, "How are you?" there is low entropy because the next word is easily guessed. However, in less predictable contexts, such as unfamiliar topics or random sequences, entropy increases because the next word carries more uncertainty. Whether you are recognizing faces, playing competitive games, or making strategic decisions, your brain's processing capacity hovers around 10 bits per second. This finding suggests that our brains prioritize eliminating redundancy and reduce high-dimensional sensory input into focused and actionable streams of information. And this 10 bits per second is the bandwidth limitations of our cognitive processes. The dramatic reduction from the brain's theoretical capacity of billions of bits to just about 10 bits per second indicates an essential adaptation for managing cognitive overload. Why can't our brain process all incoming information? Why does our brain have to prioritize high-value information? This is because processing all incoming sensory information would demand an enormous amount of energy because the brain is already one of the body's most energy-intensive organs. It consumes approximately 20% of the body's total energy at rest. If the brain attempted to process every detail from sensory inputs, it would likely face catastrophic cognitive overload. This would occur as the brain's processing centers attempt to handle the billions of bits of raw sensory data streaming in from all sensory organs simultaneously. For perspective, maintaining this high level of processing would require an energy expenditure far beyond the brain's capacity, possibly several multiples of its current consumption, which already accounts for 20% of the body's energy at rest. If the brain processed all incoming sensory data from the retina alone at its full capacity at 1.6 gigabytes per second, it would need more energy than the entire body can provide, potentially exhausting energy reserves in minutes. This would lead to rapid cognitive fatigue and a breakdown in neural efficiency, which impairs fundamental functions like memory retrieval, attention, and prioritization. The sheer volume of unfiltered information would overwhelm the decision-making processes and causes paralysis and confusion, ultimately leaving no capacity for any adaptive or goal-directed thinking. This is why energy conservation is critical for the brain, so that only critical, context-specific information reach the cognitive centers for effective decision-making. These energy-efficient mechanisms also connects to the division of labor in our brain, where different regions specialize in processing and synthesizing information. For example, visual cortex in the occipital lobe, auditory cortex in the temporal lobe, and somatosensory cortex in the parietal lobe. It handles massive sensory inputs from the eyes, ears, skin, and other organs. The outer brain is like the brain's high-capacity processor. It analyzes raw, high-dimensional information like colors, shapes, sounds, and textures. By contrast, the inner brain, which includes brain regions such as the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, functions as the decision-making core. It reduces the massive amount of information input into low-dimensional, actionable information and integrating relevant data. For example, the outer brain processes a busy street's multiple sounds, movements, and colors. The inner brain focuses only on the approaching car, allowing a quick and decisive response. This separation underscores the brain's need to prioritize essential information for survival and efficiency. And this division of labor balances detailed perception with goal-oriented behaviors. The brain's prioritization of sensory data not only enables the brain's remarkable energy efficiency, but also sets the stage for understanding how it manages tasks differently through serial and parallel processing. Sensory systems handle multiple streams in parallel, but cognition works serially, which means one at a time. Parallel processing occurs in the outer brain, where sensory inputs such as sight, sound, and touch are processed simultaneously across different regions like the visual, auditory, and somatosensory cortices. For example, when walking through a park, your brain can simultaneously register the green of the trees, the chirping of the birds, the feeling of the breeze on your skin. However, the inner brain, which handles higher-order cognition, works sequentially by focusing on one task at a time. This means that while you may process multiple sensory streams in parallel, deciding whether to cross the street or respond to a text requires shifting focus and cannot occur simultaneously. This transition from parallel to sequential processing reflects the brain's prioritization of critical goal-directed behaviors over passive sensory intake. It explains why multitasking often reduces efficiency. It also explains why task switching costs more energy. Each time the brain shifts from one task to another, It requires additional processing resources to reconfigure cognitive priorities and manage competing demands. This reconfiguration needs to activate different neural networks, suppress irrelevant ones, and reallocate attention, all of which increase cognitive load and energy consumption. Frequent task switching can also fragment our attention, which leads to inefficiencies and mental fatigue. This is why focusing on one task at a time or sequential processing is often more energy efficient and effective. Understanding how the brain manages tasks through sequential and parallel processing lays the groundwork for exploring another critical concept: how cognitive limitations can lead to overconfidence and misjudgment. You may think you can process everything happening around you in real time, but research tells a different story. This phenomenon, known as subjective inflation, it describes how we overestimate the richness and completeness of our conscious experience. This happens because of the information bottleneck. Well, our sensory systems gather data at about billion bits per second. Our brain can only consciously process about 10 bits per second. This dramatic difference creates an illusion. Since we can quickly shift our attention to any detail when needed, like moving our eyes to read a sign, we feel as though we are processing everything simultaneously. In reality, we are operating more like a spotlight, processing one thing at a time, but switching so quickly between attention that it creates a false sense of parallel processing. It's similar to how we feel when we see an entire room in detail when actually we only see high resolution in the small area where we are directly looking. The rest is filled in by our brain's ability to rapidly evaluate information when needed, creating an inflated sense of our conscious awareness. This disconnect between perceived and actual capability often leads to overconfidence, which influences our decision-making. Let's summarize what we've learned about our brain's information processing and its implication for leadership. First, we now understand that our brain has a limitation, processing only 10 bits per second despite receiving billions of bits of sensory input. This limit is actually an elegant solution for energy efficiency and focused decision-making. This information bottleneck helps us prioritize what truly matters. Second, we've learned about the illusion of multitasking. While our outer brain can process multiple sensory inputs in parallel, our inner brain, responsible for decision-making and executive functions, operates sequentially, handling one task at a time. And finally, we've explored how subjective inflation can lead us to overestimate our processing capabilities, potentially influencing our judgment and decision-making quality. What does this mean for you as a leader? First, design your communication and meetings to respect the information processing limit. Break complex information into manageable chunks. Second, embrace sequential processing. Instead of encouraging multitasking, create environments that allow for focused sequential work. Third, be mindful of subjective inflation. When you feel like you and your team can handle everything at once, remember that our perception of our processing capacity often exceeds reality. Fourth, structure your decision-making processes to account for our cognitive limitations. Allow adequate time for information processing and integration. Our understanding of those cognitive limitations can actually help us work smarter with our natural cognitive processes to become more effective, help us work smarter and become more effective decision makers. Now think about one meeting or decision-making process you'll redesign based on what we've learned today. How will you apply this knowledge to make your decision-making more cognitively informed?